Where did you find this very intriguing relic? There is so much quality information inside of the Midnight Society book. Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Mr. Messenger, once again, I have been awoken from my slumber, and I see you have brought some important information that you and I do need to attend to. Absolutely delicious. I do appreciate the fact that you brought me something to feed on. I have been sleeping for so long. It was a necessity to replenish lost nutritional value. Be so kind as to release me from my silver chains and shackles so that you and I can attend to contracts that are owed to me. My creatures of the night, yes, welcome back to Midnight Lycanthropy here on LordeStarfox Radio. Tonight, we do have one of the members of the good old Midnight Society team. Yes, one of my paranormal experts, JJ Messenger, already sitting around the late night fire, getting ready to burn the midnight timber into the early hours of the morning. There are so many contracts that are owed to me, and I grow very tired of waiting for payment. Mr. Messenger, are you ready to go help me take what is mine?
Oh, yeah.
Tonight, to the audience, Mr. Messenger here is going to be taking center stage, informing us about a really bizarre encounter with an individual by the name of Bill Ramsey that was over in the good old UK that had an extremely interesting breakdown that was covered by Ed and Lorraine Warren. You should recognize those names. Yes, that is some old school stuff right there. Mr. Messenger, the microphone is yours. Take center stage and let's dance here.
Yes, Bill Ramsey. Bill Ramsey, the topic of a book called Werewolf. And it was a fairly good seller for the Warrens. It was written by Robert Chase. I believe that was his name. Listeners, you have to double check. Very good book, very compelling. And when I was in high school, I knew the family of the Warrens. I met the Warrens on several occasions. I became very invested in their cases and read everything they put out and was intrigued by the couple and by what they were doing. So, yeah, this is in my wheelhouse. In my later years, when I had my own paranormal group, Lorraine actually helped me on 2 different cases. and she was deep in her 80s. So, all the credit, all the admiration goes out to Lorraine. At the time Ed had passed, yeah, kudos to Lorraine Warren, a very noble, courageous, gutsy woman. Bill Ramsey lived in, I believe they call it South End, England. I'm like, what? The South End of what? But I think that's the name of the town. And it's a small town. And growing up in England, he had a very strange occurrence happen to him outside while playing. He was enveloped in a very, very cold pocket of air. He remembers feeling chilled and goosebumps, and a very foul smell came around him. Along with the foul smell and the cold air came this this type of instinctual vision of joining a wolf pack and seeking out and being one of the wolves. Like all of a sudden he had this compulsion to be a wolf. And he would fall into these uncontrollable fits. He apparently he lifted up a fence post. Now, anyone that's worked on a farm knows that when they plant those fence posts, those are in the ground pretty solid. He tore up a fence post along with the fence connected to it. He also bit through chicken wire. And he had this compulsion to act like an animal. And he would be violent at times. Fortunately, this has subsided for a certain number of years until he was deep into his adulthood, perhaps 30s or 40s. I'm not sure exactly where he was. I think in his 40s. And he started to have these fits of violence and rage and wolf-like behavior once again. He would feel something start to overtake him, a sense of madness and rage and like a feral energy build up in his chest. And he would literally start acting like a wolf. He would run around on all fours. He would bite people. He would claw, and he became extremely, extremely powerful, very strong. The police department in Southend were very familiar with Mr. Ramsey, and when he was himself, he was very gentle, very calm, well spoken. Just like a gentleman. Like a normal person. And when he came under these fits, he became extremely aggressive, powerful, animal like, and he would want to be locked up. He would go to the police department asking them to lock him up. Now, the obvious question is, did he ever seek out a psychologist or a psychiatrist? Yes, they were they had a hard time diagnosing exactly what was going on with him. He didn't seem to fit the parameters of anything in the DSM psychiatric catalog of disorders. He seemed, it was like a callback to what they used to call lycanthropy. Back in the old days when people were believed to be werewolves, and back hundreds of years ago, and it was termed lycanthropy, and the term lunacy actually comes from the Latin luna for moon, which is also associated with lycanthropy, that they would respond to the full moon or howl at the full moon. Thus, we came up with the word lunacy. He had an extreme problem going on. The police department would lock him up at his request. he would go to the police cell and be like, lock me up, I'm a danger. I can't control myself. When I feel it coming on, they would lock him up in his cell. He would go crazy, act wild. There was one occasion where he fit his arm, shoulder, and head to a very tiny rectangular space in the door, the kind of space that you would look through. And, people were saying it would practically be impossible to normally contort your body in such a way to get your arm, shoulder, and head through this tiny little rectangle. And there was a paranormal show back in the 1990s that was called Sightings. And Sightings did a story on this werewolf of London. He wasn't technically in London, but he was in England, and the American Werewolf in London was a hit movie by this time. And Werewolves of London, the rock tune, everyone enjoys that around Halloween. So, yeah, werewolves in London, they seem to go together in our mythos. And Bill Ramsey struck that chord for the media. Oh, look, it's a werewolf from London. So the TV show Sightings that covered everything paranormal at the time in the 1990s. It was syndicated, I believe it was on Fox, on the Fox network. Sightings did the story about Bill Ramsey, what was going on with him, his feats of strength, the fact that the police locked him up, and et cetera, et cetera. And who should watch this episode and catch this episode other than our very own Ed and Lorraine Warren from Connecticut? Now, they saw this story on Sightings and got immediately intrigued by what was going on, and they were wondering if there was something supernatural at play, at foot here. Lorraine, being a clairvoyant, she became somewhat intrigued by this case, and she bought a tape of the episode and would replay it over and over, trying to get a sense of what exactly was going on with Mr. Ramsey. And at Lorraine's behest, Ed at first was reluctant. He's like, oh no, we can't be doing werewolves, Lorraine. And they're having a hard enough time believing us with ghosts, demons. Now, if we start talking werewolves, we're going to lose our audience. And people are going to be like, okay, you gone too far. But Lorraine's like, no, this man is suffering. He needs our help. We need to find him. We need to offer our services here. So they took one of their frequent trips to England. They would go to England at least once a year on tours. It was their routine. They would bring tours to England and bring them to haunted locations. It was one of the ways they generated revenue. On one of their trips to England, they went to Southend and they were contacting the police department about this much publicized werewolf, Bill Ramsey, and they said yes, we're acquainted with him, and they got in touch with Bill Ramsey and asked, would you be interested in talking with this team from the States? They're called the Warrens. You might have heard of them. They were at this time somewhat famous for different case studies, including the Amityville House. And Bill Ramsey was game. So after the Warrens interviewed Mr. Ramsey, Lorraine had the definite impression that Mr. Ramsey was suffering from a type of demonic possession, a demonic entity that was very canine in mannerisms and very animalistic in the way it presented itself. So, Mr. Ramsey and his wife arranged to come to the States and through a traditional bishop named Robert McKenna, who lived in the same town as the Warrens and was very instrumental in many of the Warrens' cases. Now, when I was working with David Considine with Phantasm Psychic Research, David was a student of Ed back in the day. And David also worked with Bishop McKenna. And Bishop McKenna, much like Lorraine, lived deep into his 90s. So he was doing the work all the way up into his 90s, much like Lorraine Warren was doing later on. I had the privilege of meeting Bishop McKenna and being present for one of his, when he was clearing a house of demonic infestation. I had the privilege of being part of the team that assisted that whole routine. Yeah, Bishop McKenna is legit. He's not part of the mainstream. He belongs to what they call the Orthodox. It's like a very old style. As such, they didn't have to go through all those hoops. They brought Mr. Ramsey to Bishop McKenna, and after a 45-minute ritual, Bill Ramsey's problem was over. He no longer ever had any fit of rage, of animalistic behavior. He never was overcome by what he believed was a, quote, wolf spirit, unquote. And during the ritual, there was some manifestation of what he was experiencing. You know, he acted a bit animalistic. He was contorting his body and snarling and growling, but nothing violent really happened, fortunately, for everyone there. Because according to the South End constables in the UK, according to them, it would take several of them to hold Mr. Ramsey down. And Mr. Ramsey was like 5'8" and 160 pounds. You know, he wasn't like a big, huge powerhouse of a man, but when he was under his spells, it would take several very large policemen to restrain him. So nothing extremely violent broke out other than the fact that he was contorting and snarling and making odd gestures and movements, but that's as bad as the ritual got. And fortunately for everyone, for Mr. Bill Ramsey, for his wife, for everyone present in the Our Lady Chapel there in Monroe, Connecticut, he was cured. Now, skeptics could say the cure was psychosomatic. It was maybe the power of suggestion. And if that's the case, okay, you know, whatever works. So whether it was an actual supernatural spiritual cure or whether it was the power of suggestion, it was a good ending. It all came out good. Back to you, Ken. Your thoughts?
Well, first off, that's absolutely epic stuff right there. Super gnarly. From what I had heard, most of that was something that was pretty interesting before, yet you did have a little bit more that you presented in there. Throughout your own time that you spent on this, how do you feel? Do you know if anyone ever saw Bill Ramsey grow hair, grow long nails, have any sort of canine features to his face, etc.? Meaning, with adrenaline, and people have had huge amounts of energy. You can look it up in situations where all of a sudden somebody just lifts up a car that was on top of their dog. It is a real thing. Are you thinking it's definitely not a true werewolf here and more potentially along the lines of a psychotic break or maybe some sort of possession? Where are you sitting, man?
Generally, I'm really undecided. I do trust the Warrens with their judgment, but like I said, even if it was psychosomatic, psychotic type of delusion, it all came out good. So I know when Sightings did the follow up, the TV show, when they did the follow up to the case with the exorcism and Robert McKenna, they interviewed the bishop. They did the whole follow up. Lorraine believed that she saw Mr. Ramsey changing in appearance. That he was looking like he was sprouting more hair on his hands, on his face. That his ears were pointing. Got pointy, as she would say. The photographs are kind of vague. I can't really confirm or deny that. Also, Lorraine might be seeing the whole situation from a clairvoyant stance, and she had no idea that average everyday people don't see these colors that she would see. This would go on to be interpreted as an aura, the color of your aura, your energy. Now, she would, even as a youth, see some people look yellow, some people looked red, and then there were people with black that surrounded them. And she was actually seeing the aura energy that surrounded people. So when she was seeing Bill Ramsey looking more and more wolfish, I'm wondering if she was seeing this as a clairvoyant as opposed to, just the way you and I would see it. The photographs aren't really indicating any dramatic physical change, but maybe there was. I wasn't there. I can't say. Mr. Ramsey, I'm glad that everything worked out and he was no longer plagued by these fits of lunacy, which would relate back to lycanthropy, and that he could lead a normal life from that point on. Uh, was it supernatural? I really, I don't know for sure. All I know is that whatever works, works.
Again, very bizarre for sure. So much that dives and occurs into this. Do you know if any of the police officers that directly dealt with him had any sort of response or comment to this? And from what you stated at the end of the investigation, did Ed and Lorraine have similar views on this, or were they still kind of separated as well?
At the end of the case, I believe Ed and Lorraine were both taking the position that it was a case of demonic possession and that the demon was presenting itself as a wolf. Um, the police, I believe they're interviewed on the original episode, the sightings episode. They gave their testimony about the man's abnormal strength and his abnormal contortion ability. So one could say, like you did, that psychotic fits or fits of um, altered states of consciousness can dramatically increase your strength. Yes. Can they cause some unusual contorting abilities? I would guess. Um, would such a psychosis be dramatically solved and cured by a 45-minute ritual? I don't know. I really don't know. I would suspect if it was a true psychotic break or a form of psychosis, that would have been a short-term solution, and he would have just went back to the way he was eventually. That's my suspicion.
Wow. Again, so bizarre. One of the last things I'll say with like the contortion aspects, if you do have one of those things where you don't feel pain correctly, then I guess you could probably put yourself in some pretty bizarre situations. And then as we are tying this up, I'll give you another example from Medora, Texas, which I've spoken about this before, and I believe you and I have with Bobby Businger, where it was supposedly an actual werewolf that the newspaper ran with. He was unable to talk for like what, I think 35 years until just recently he finally sat down and now is able to talk about what really happened. It had nothing to do with somebody turning into a quote unquote werewolf. Yet, yes, this individual did rip apart these guard dogs, didn't feel the pain, and they attacked him because he had one of those disorders where you didn't feel pain. He was a huge jacked up gym goer guy. That was crazy. And at one point in time, one of his family members had lived in that cabin. So he would come back and slam on the side of the building. He would start howling, at the moon and things because he wasn't in the right frame of mind. Yet this is directly from the mouth of Bobby Businger. There was no transformations. There was no aspects of this person looking like a werewolf. Yeah, he was acting animalistic, like you said, because he was not in the right frame of mind, right? And was just off in Looney Tune land. Yet when they did find him, the police, he was walking down the middle of the road, came back and told Bobby he had escaped, from a place that he shouldn't have. And they ended up putting him back up in there because, yes, he was a quote unquote danger to the public. There are plenty of cases with people that have psychotic breaks that howl at the moon. And in general, people can look up how the full moon affects people's sleep patterns or how crime will go up in cities. Just bizarre, man.
Yeah, you know what would be an interesting thing? To compare and contrast all of these lycanthropy accounts,
Mm-hmm.
it's to catalog them all together in their guide, like, oh, look, it's the lycanthropy disorder. But, this is a bizarre thing, you know. Uh, are any of them exhibiting physical changes? That would be extremely unusual. You have the Native American lore of changing shape and form and being a skinwalker and all of that. People on YouTube are always posting these videos of these vague forms that seem to change shape. I don't know. I don't know. There's a lot of mythic folklore involved in it. How much of it is real? My mind is open. As a guy who's explored the paranormal and the cryptids, I know that sometimes I'm very shocked as to what actually happens. And things that I doubted in the past, I no longer doubt. But I have yet to see any evidence of shapeshifting ever.
Again, so creepy. Yeah, it's just one of those things. When you look at it, there is so much that has occurred. And I do believe, correct me if I'm wrong, before we tie this up, the last time Bill Ramsey ever spoke, he said he kind of wished he never even talked about this publicly, more or less, in the first place. And I believe that's the last time he's ever talked about it. Super gnarly. Before you give yourself the good old patented quote from you, the shameless plug, right? Heck yeah, I use that in literally all my episodes when I tell people to do that. What's your placement on this, man? If you had to make a conclusion as I ask you this question, and you being a member of the Midnight Society team, what would be your final thought on this? Where would you place this, man? A psychotic break, a paranormal possession, a demon, a actual werewolf, a skinwalker? What do you think's going on, man?
I would rule out Skinwalker. Rule out our traditional thoughts on werewolf because there were no obvious physical changes that we could see. Maybe Lorraine in her clairvoyance could. Um, I'm 50-50. I'm 50% psychotic breaks, 50% demonic possession. Now, it could go either way because I don't know. I just don't know on that regard. I'm not married to either possibility, you know. That's the good thing. For my shameless plug, I am my YouTube channels are Unknowns from the Woods, where I encounter things that I never thought were real or even possible in the Northeast. And I also have a channel, Searching the Supernatural, where things such as faith and demons and ghosts and that type of thing, some archaeology, I dive into that.
Love it right there. Absolutely excellent stuff. And to the audience, please make sure to head on over to JJ's page, hit that like button, leave those comments, subscribe if you haven't yet. Same here, please, to the good old Midnight Society and Midnight Lycanthropy podcast. Really helps us out in the good old algorithm, which is something that, hey, we all want to be part of the captain. Cool individuals, correct? It helps for sure.
My legendary creatures of the night, I do adore every single one of you, and thank you for hanging out tonight. Please like, comment, subscribe, share the truth to the algorithm, and remember, there are monsters that lurk in the darkness. Where did you find this very intriguing relic? There is so much quality information inside of the Midnight Society.